Köszöntöm nézőinket, szervusztok! A mai vendégem Didier Reynders, az Európai Bizottság igazságügyi biztosa, aki hivatalos látogatásra érkezett Magyarországra, és vállalta, hogy elsőként a Partizánon számol be arról, hogy pontosan mi is a célja a Magyarországra látogatásának. Biztos úr, köszöntöm a stúdióban.
Good evening.
Ahogy láttuk a Facebookon, Varga Judittal találkozott a mai napon, és volt egy megbeszélésünk, aminek a végén Varga Judit egy könyvet is ajándékozott önnek. Pontosan miről beszéltek, és miről tájékoztatta a miniszterasszony?
I'm coming to talk about the rule of law, in fact, and because we have decided, the Commission, to publish a rule of law report every year on the 27 member states. Of course, the first edition last year was published in the midst of the pandemic, and so I've started to visit the different member states by video. This year, we have published the second edition in July, and I started a tour of the different capitals. I went to Vienna some weeks ago, I was in Roma last week, but now I'm in Budapest, and I will continue to Warsaw and all the time to different member states. And the goal is to discuss with, of course, the government, the different authorities and the judicial authorities, but also the parliament, so majority and opposition, and the civil society about the rule of law, so the independence of the justice system, the fight against corruption, the media pluralism, but also the different kind of checks and balances in the different countries, and certainly the role of the civil society organizations and the way to organize the public space. So it's a very important topic, and we try to improve the situation in all the member states if it's possible, if we have a good reaction from the member states about our remarks and our observations.
Nagyon örülünk annak, hogy elfogadta a meghívásunkat, és most kérdezhetjük Önt. Mi a magyar médiának ahhoz a részéhez tartozunk, a kormánytól független részéhez, akik például a miniszterasszonyhoz semmilyen hozzáféréssel nem rendelkezünk, tehát nincs lehetőségünk érdemi kérdéseket föltenni a számára. Ezért volna fontos megnevezni, hogy konkrétan milyen ügyeket tematizált a miniszterasszony felé.
About the situation of the media, to be very concrete, I have explained to the authorities, and we have said in the report that we have some concerns about the media pluralism and the media freedom due to the fact that there are different difficulties with the organization of the media council, the media regulator. I mean, we have a composition of the media regulator with the members of the same political party around the table, so without a real diversity. And we have seen also that there is no real rules for the distribution of state advertising to the different media. And so we have said it's very important to pay attention to that, because if we don't pay attention to that, we'll have more and more concentration of the media in the same hands without real pluralism. And we have had some remarks, about one specific radio, club radio, when it was possible to don't receive a license to continue to organize the activities. And then, of course, we have, like in many other member states, to be open, some remarks on the threats against journalists. You know that we have seen some murders in different member states, like in Malta some years ago with Daphne Caruana Galizia, more recently in the Netherlands with Peter de Vries. But it's not only violence against journalists, also threats through the social media, through some declarations, through multiple lawsuits against journalists. And we want to come with a Media Act, and we want to come with some instrument to protect, again, not only the media pluralism and to see what are the different owners of the media, but also to protect the journalists in their job day after day.
Ha már említette az újságírók elleni fenyegetéseket, volt-e lehetősége tematizálni a miniszterasszony felé azt, hogy jelenlegi tudásunk szerint a teljes Európai Unión belül kizárólag a magyar állam használta a Pegasus szoftvert megfigyelésre kifejezetten civil aktivisták, újságírók ellen? Ugye volt nem olyan régen egy kormányzati képviselő, aki megerősítette azt, hogy egy minisztérium vásárolt ebből a szoftverből, tehát mostanra már nem csak feltételezéssel élhetünk, amit korábban megírtak a sajtóban, hanem konkrét tudásunk van róla. Volt-e lehetősége ezt tematizálni a miniszterasszonynak?
No, but it was very clear. I've explained our position about the use of Pegasus in the parliament this morning here in Budapest, because of course we are concerned by the possible use by member states, certainly by Hungary, of such a kind of application, due to what? You know that we have in Europe the GDPR, so yes, to protect the personal data, and it's the task of all the national data protection authorities to organize a correct implementation of such a kind of regulation that we have at the EU level. So I know that there are investigations started on the 5th of August from the Data Protection Authority in Hungary, and I've said that we need to receive now some information about the different elements of the investigations. And if it's not the case at the national level, it will be important to us to discuss that with the European Data Protection Board. So the board with all the data protection authorities of the different member states around the table. Because you know that with such a kind of application coming from Israel, it was possible to have some surveillance not only on journalists, also on some politicians, some business people, but also from other member states, and maybe from the EU level too. So we are engaged in such a process. I've said that to the Hungarian Parliament, like to the European Parliament. We asked to the Data Protection Authority in Hungary to deliver, to do the job, to go to the end of the investigations and to give us information about the investigations. If it's not, it will be maybe important to have such a discussion with all the data protection authorities in the board at the European level.
Varga Judit elismerte vagy tagadta, hogy a magyar állam vagy a magyar kormány pontosabban használta a Pegasus szoftvert?
No, but it was very clear that there was a use by the Hungarian government, so it was not...
Elismerte a miniszterasszony ezt?
I didn't have the new discussion now with the Minister of Justice, but we have had before, and it was very clear and confirmed that there was a use of the application, but not a use to control the journalist, of course, not the use to have a wrong application. So that's the task of the data protection authorities to verify, of course.
Bocsánat, csak azt mondta, hogy megerősítették. A magyar kormány erősítette meg, vagy ismerte el önök felé ennek a szoftvernek a használatát?
We have received the confirmation before, not during this visit, but we have received the confirmation before that it was possible to use. But again, the problem is to see if it's a correct use or not, and we have received many informations about incorrect use of such a kind of application. So it's the reason why we ask to the body involved in the process, so the Data Protection Authority, to organize the investigations and to come now with some reserves of such an investigation.
Bocsánat, ennyire aprólékos vagy, de ez egy rendkívül érzékeny ügy Magyarországon, és azt gondolom, hogy itt az egész EU-s közösségen belül, és ezért fontos, hogy nagyon pontosan értsem, amit mond. A magyar kormány megerősítette önök felé azt, hogy használta a Pegasus szoftvert?
But we have received the confirmation again before this visit and
De a magyar kormánytól.
Sorry. Yes, of course.
Okay. Ez egy új hír, tehát ez mindenképpen egy új szintje a Pegasus dilemmának itt Magyarországon. Menjünk akkor tovább. Én adott alig egy hónapja egy nyilatkozatot a Bloombergnek, ahol úgy fogalmazott, hogy napok vagy hetek kérdése a jogállamisági mechanizmus aktiválása. Itt mondjuk konkrétan Magyarországot nem említette, de ugye azt lehet tudni, hogy az Európai Bíróság döntése a jogállamisági feltételrendszerről csak valamikor jövő év elejére várható. Elképzelhető, hogy a bírósági döntés hiányában is megindítják ezt az érintett tagállamokkal szemben.
The mechanism is into force since the 1st of January this year. And so we have said, and the President of the Commission have said to the Parliament in September again, that we will start with some letters to the different governments to see what are the explanations about the possible links between the breach to the rule of law, or possible breach to the rule of law, and the protection of the union budget. You know that there are also some discussions before the Court of Justice about that, because there's a procedure introduced by Hungary and Poland against the regulation. So we are hoping that we will have a decision of the court at the end of the year or beginning of next year. And if it's the case, then it will be possible to launch a procedure if it's needed. So we are now analyzing the situation to collect enough elements to have a robust file before to do something. Because you know that we have two possibilities at the Commission level. Or we go to the Court of Justice, and we have organized, you know, different infringement proceedings about different laws or different decisions in different member states, and certainly also in Hungary. And we try to win, of course, before the Court of Justice. The other way will be to go to the Council, because if we try to use the conditionality mechanism, it will be with, at the end, a qualified majority decision at the council level. So for the moment we are collecting the different elements to see if it's needed to start a procedure, and we have already published the guidelines about the way to use the new mechanism into force since the 1st of January. And so maybe in the next days, because we have said some times ago in the next weeks, we will engage different discussions by letters with the member states, and then we will see if it's needed to start a real concrete procedure with a notification.
Hogy értettem, azt mondta, hogy gyűjtik a konkrét információkat, adatokat, dossziét készítenek igazából, hogy ha megszületik a bírósági döntés, akkor azonnal tudjanak lépni. Meg tudja erősíteni, hogy léteznek ezek a dossziék a bizottságnál?
I confirm that we are continuing all the proceedings before the court. That's a first part of the process. And you know that we have introduced a lot of infringement proceedings. And at the end, if we have a decision of the court, it's a binding decision of the court. About the conditionality mechanism, we are collecting all the information to see when it will be possible to start a real process. So it's too early to say more than that, except that I confirm what was said by the President of the Commission. We will engage a discussion with some member states by letters.
Ugye az is egy megállapodás volt, amikor a bíróság elé mentek, hogy kidolgoz a bizottság egy eljárásrendi javaslatot arra vonatkozóan, hogy mégis hogyan kellene kinéznie ennek a mechanizmusnak az életbelépésének. Kialakult-e már mostanra igazából ez az ajánlás együttes?
I don't understand really the question, sorry.
Ugye, amikor tavaly abról állapodtak meg, hogy az Európai Bíróság elé viszik ezt a dilemmát, akkor a bizottság vállalta azt is, hogy kidolgozza azt a javaslat együttest, hogy hogyan néz neki a jogállamisági mechanizmus életbeléptetése. A konkrét eljárásrenddel rendelkeznek-e már mostanra?
Yes, but we have we have put some guidelines about the way to use, but the main discussions was about the protection of the final beneficiaries, because if one day it's possible for the Council to suspend the funding of different policies, the goal is not to stop or to suspend the funding for the final beneficiaries. To give two examples, we don't want to cut the funding for the farmers if they don't have anything to do with possible breach in the rule of law, and certainly not to cut the funding of some civil society organizations working for the protection of the rule of law. So it was one of the important discussions to see if we are using the mechanism or it's possible to protect the final beneficiary. So if we have sent some proposals to the Parliament and the Council, we have received remarks on both sides. Now we have finalized the guidelines about the way to use the conditionality mechanism, and now we are just waiting the decision of the Court of Justice. Of course, if there are some remarks coming from the Court of Justice, we will put that also in the guidelines that we have provided about the use of the regulation.
Erről tud-e konkrétumot mondani? Tehát amennyiben mégis megszüntetnék egy tagállamnak a forráselosztási jogát, vagy felfüggesztenék azt, ki lehetne a forrásosztó? Az önkormányzatok?
No, but first of all, it's possible to continue to ask to the member states to provide the funding. Also, we stop the funding from the EU level. It's a part of the funding coming from the member states. It's also maybe possible to work with a direct funding coming from the EU through the final beneficiary. So there are different mechanisms to try to protect again the final beneficiary. It was a real request also from the European Parliament to do that, because again, if we have some concern about the rule of law in one member state and we want to protect the financial interests of the Union, it's not to cut the funding for the final beneficiary. So we will see what are the best way to do that. But that will depend, of course, of what kind of decision at the Council level. If we start the process, it's too early to say what it will be precisely possible to do, because that depends what kind of suspension or what kind of funding and what kind of policy. So of course it's too early to say more on this.
De elképzelhetőnek tartja azt, hogy amennyiben a magyar állam ellenében megindul a jogállamisági mechanizmus, akkor a forrásosztás jogát átengednék az önkormányzatoknak?
Yes, but again, I don't want to say what is possible if we start something else.
De ez nem zárható ki.
I'm just saying that for the moment we are preparing all the possible files. We will send maybe some letters to the member states to ask more clarification about the situation, and when we will decide to start the procedure, I will answer to your question about what is the reality, but not if it's possible to do something or not.
Ön szerint ez jövő év elejéig megtörténhet?
Of course, it's possible to organize the process about the conditionality because the regulation I said is into place since the 1st of January 2021. And so, of course, if we decide to do something, it will be for all the funding of different policies since the beginning of this year. The regulation is into force. It's a regulation adopted by the Parliament and the Council. So without any doubts, we have now the regulation on the table. But to start the procedure before the Council, we will wait the decision of the Court of Justice on the procedure introduced by Hungary and Poland.
Ugye január óta nem érkeznek a helyreállítási források Magyarországra, és ön egy nyilatkozatában nem zárta ki azt, hogy ez valamelyest egyébként összefügghet a jogállamisággal kapcsolatos aggályokkal. Csak a kérdést hadd tegyem föl, milyen konkrét feltételeket kellene teljesíteni a magyar kormánynak ahhoz, hogy megindulhassanak ezek a források Magyarországra?
It's not a specific situation for Hungary. The regulation is very clear. We need to see if there are some risks to have breaches to the rule of law related to the protection of the financial interests of the Union. And so we'll analyze that in all the different situations. When we will take a decision about one member state or another, I will give more details. But it's impossible now to say more about that than just to say that we are preparing all the possible files to see if it's needed to start a procedure. And when we will decide to start a procedure, of course we'll give more details about the content.
De akár formálisan, akár informálisan fogalmaztak-e meg bármilyen elvárást a magyar kormány felé?
But again, it's too early to say that. For the moment, we are just collecting the different information at the Commission level. And now we will start maybe to send some questions. When we will do that, I will explain what kind of question we will send to the member states, but not before.
Jó. Lehet tudni a különböző jelentésekről, amelyeket összeállított a bizottság, hogy súlyos problémájuk van, ahogy ön is említette, például a média helyzettel, a korrupcióval, a jogállamiság helyzetével. Ezért most azt szeretném kérni, hogy tud-e mondani olyan konkrét problémát a magyar állam, magyar kormány részéről, ami mindenképpen megoldást kell, hogy nyerjen, mert súlyos aggályuk van ennek a működésével szemben.
Again, not in relation with the conditionality, because it's too early to say something about that, but we have introduced some infringement proceedings before the Court of Justice.
Bocsánat, de lehet, hogy félreértés van. Én kifejezetten az EU fundokról, a Next Generationről beszélek.
Sorry, if you want to have the discussions about the recovery and resilience plan, that's something else. And so we have discussions on this, and the request was to implement new measures to monitor the use of the funding of the different policies. And we want to have a correct answer to the different remarks put forward by Olaf, you know, the administrative body in charge of the fight against different kind of misuse of possible European money. And of course we try to ask how it's possible to implement better protections for the possible misuse of European money. And I've said also to the Hungarian authorities that it's more and more important to do that, also due to the fact that we don't have another instrument to react. You know that there are 22 member states participating in the European Public Prosecutor Office, so it will be possible, it's possible now since the 1st of June, to organize investigations and prosecutions from the EU level, but not in all the member states, because there was a voluntary mechanism. So I've asked the Hungarian government to take part in the European Public Prosecutor Office. Like Sweden will do that maybe next year. We have a commitment of Sweden to do that. So why not maybe to see Hungary taking part? But the request about the discussions concerning the plan of the resilience and the recovery and resilience plan, it's a request about a better implementation of some new mechanisms to protect the interest of the Union budget. So I mean different kind of monitoring system to be sure that the different remarks of Olaf are fulfilled.
Akkor korrektan megfogalmazva a kérdésemet, kifejezetten a Next Generation Funddal kapcsolatban, kifejezetten az EU-s forrásokkal kapcsolatban fogalmaztak-e meg bármilyen elvárást formálisan, informálisan a magyar kormány felé?
We are putting different kind of milestones in many different plans. Just to give an example, I was last week in Italy, And to go further in the implementation of the plan, they need to pass different reforms to the parliament. They have huge discussions about justice reforms to be sure that we have an efficient justice system in Italy. And so they have engaged such a reform. But there are demands and conditions in all the member states. And again, the discussions with Hungary about the reforms are first of all about the implementation of a correct monitoring of the use of the EU money on the basis of some remarks coming from Olaf.
Vannak ugye konkrét konfliktusok, amikről szeretném, hogyha elmondaná az álláspontjukat. Elvárás-e például mondjuk a magyar kormány felé, hogy a miniszterelnök közvetlen családtagjai vagy környezetében lévő emberek ne kaphassanak EU-s támogatást?
But we try to see that the allocation of the funds is organizing in a correct way. So with one of another family, that depends just about a correct monitoring, a correct control. And so it's the same for all the different use of the open money. And so we want to be sure that it's possible to have a fair process and to control the use of the money in the country. Like we are asking for all the member states to put into place enough mechanisms to control that, to don't have any misuse, because you know that it's a huge amount of money that we have decided to put in the recovery and the resilience facility. And so, of course, in all the member states, we want to be sure that there are enough protections to avoid any conflict of interest, corruption cases, or other kind of misuse of the funds. And so we have discussions with all the member states about that. Until now, we have the same discussion with Hungary. Until the possible commitment from Hungary to organize those reforms, we are in discussion about the plan.
Elvárnák-e a magyar kormánytól, hogy támogassa az Európai Ügyészséghez való csatlakozást?
I hope so. I've asked that different times, but the reaction was all the time why it is so important for Hungary and not for the others. And now I've said we have a good example. Sweden was out of the EPPO, the European Public Prosecutor Office, and Sweden decided to come maybe next year inside. So if Sweden is doing that, why not Hungary? Till now, I didn't receive a positive reaction, but I'm fully aware that it's a voluntary choice because it was not a mandatory regulation. It was a choice of each and every one member state to take part or not. But we are 22, we'll be maybe 23 next year, so I'm sure that it will be a good signal with such a huge of new funding coming from the EU level to take part in the process. But that will be a national choice in Hungary, like in Poland and maybe in other member states.
De nem kötik az Európai Ügyészséghez való csatlakozáshoz ezeknek az EU-s alapoknak a megnyitását és a források további folyósítását?
No, of course, again, it was not a mandatory regulation, so it was clear since the beginning that it's on the voluntary basis. And you know, I'll try to defend the rule of law. And so if we decide about something and we are saying that it's a voluntary approach, it's a voluntary choice for the member state to come. Of course, I'm just saying it will be a good signal to show that there is a real willingness to take part in the process, but we are with a voluntary mechanism, so it will be a decision at the national level to take part or not.
A homofób törvény kapcsán várnak el bármilyen változtatást a magyar kormány részéről?
I try to receive some proposal of changes, and so you know that we have started a procedure about the law, and if it's impossible to change the procedure, of course, we will continue our proceeding before the Court of Justice. Is the logical way to solve such a kind of issue, like we have had in the past discussions about the foreign funding of NGOs or the organization of universities, all the way to organize the process about different kind of other legislations. When we have seen the new legislations about the minors, we have said immediately that in our mind and in my views, there is a risk of discrimination due to the sexual orientation of some people. And so we have expressed the fact that if you organize such a discrimination in relation with some EU rules, like the free movement of books or free movement of audiovisual services, we need to act. And so we'll act before the court, except, of course, if it's possible for the Hungarian parliament to change the law on some points. I've sent with my colleague Thierry Breton a letter to the government about that. We have received reactions without a real intention to change the law if we are staying in such a situation, we'll go to the court and it will be at the end to the court to decide.
De ha a bíróság elítéli a magyar kormány, de a magyar kormány mégis kitart az álláspontja mellett, akkor jöhet a pénzbüntetés a kormánnyal szemben?
But we have all the possibilities to continue to work on this. First of all, so to go to the court and to have a decision of the court. And of course, if there's a decision of the court, it's a binding decision. And you know, like for all the different decisions of the court, if there's a refusal to apply the decision, it's true that we have the possibility to go to the court and to ask a daily financial sanction. But till now, I must say that I've seen the discussion about the foreign funding of NGO. And after some months, it was possible to have a new law, and so to engage a new procedure to apply the ECJ ruling. It was the same about the universities. I'm hoping that if we have a decision of the court about the law on the minors in our sense, it will be possible for the Hungarian government to apply. But we have all the tools at our disposal to go further. And you know, the rule of law is that, is to go, if it's needed, to the court. It's possible for a government to disagree with the commission. It's the case there, because you know that the government is saying that it's a law to protect the children. Mm-hmm. We are sure that there is a discrimination. Of course, at the end, it will be a decision of the court. And I've just said to the authorities, if you want to go till the decision of the court, at the end, you will have to apply the decision because it will be a binding decision. If it's not, of course, we have other kind of instrument to go further.
Ugye a Lengyel Alkotmánybíróság nem olyan régen kimondta, hogy az uniós alapszerződések több pontja is ellentétes a lengyel alkotmánnyal, emiatt van egy igen éles vita Lengyelország és az EU között. Ugye Mateusz Morawiecki lengyel kormányfő kifejezetten azzal érvelt, hogy ha Brüsszel egy európai szuperállamot akarna létrehozni, akkor azt ne jogi eljárásokkal akarja kikényszeríteni, hanem politikai érvekkel győzze meg az európai társadalmakat. Mit gondol erről az érvelésről?
But in Poland, it's a very specific situation. We have concerns about the independence of the judiciary. And so the previous commission and the actual one decide to introduce different, again, infringement proceedings before the Court of Justice. And you know that we have obtained different positive decisions of the Court of Justice about that. But if you look to the decision of the Constitutional Tribunal, what is very exceptional in such a decision is that the decision is taken on the request of the Prime Minister. It's a specific motion introduced by the Prime Minister. It's a challenge to the treaty for the first time. It's not about a specific EU law or a specific decision of one EU body. It's against the treaties. And it's a decision taken by a tribunal about which one we have some concern concerning the independence of the body. And so you have seen maybe in Strasbourg, in the European Court for Human Rights, some decisions saying that it's not an independent tribunal, like for some chambers of the Supreme Court. So what is at stake in Poland, it's clearly the independence of the judiciary. And in such a case, of course, it's impossible to us to agree with a decision putting aside the European Treaty, because it's not an imposition from Brussels. It's a commitment from all the member states to apply the treaties. And so when it was possible to decide, sometimes by referendum, to organize the accession to the EU, it was with a clear commitment to apply all the provision of the treaties. And in the treaties, it's very clear that there is a primacy of the EU law, but also that all the decisions of the European Court of Justice are binding. And so we ask just to be in full compliance with that. And of course, when we see a national court deciding that the national constitution is above the European treaties, it's impossible to agree. So we need to react. And we have reacted in different cases, but certainly the situation in Poland is very exceptional because for the first time it's a real contestation against the treaty.
Egy picit absztraktabb szinten megfogalmazva a dilemmát, van egy ilyen visszavisszatérő joghierarchiabeli konfliktus, ugyanis az alapszerződések egyike sem tartalmazza igazából azt a kitételt, hogy az EU-s jog előrébb lenne a nemzetállaminál. Ugye van egy 63-as bírósági döntés, ami kvázi egy ilyen hallgatólagos megállapodás képezett egészen az utóbbi időkig a tagállamok között arra vonatkozóan, hogy az EU-s jogot előrébb tartják a nemzeti jognál. De most ezek a döntések és ezek a helyzetek pont azt mutatják, hogy nem biztos, hogy ezt eljárásrendi kérdésekkel az ilyesfajta konfliktusokat meg lehet oldani. Ugye maga Angela Merkel is azt mondta, hogy szerencsére szerencsésebb volna kifejezetten politikai konfliktusként kezelni azt, hogy hol húzódnak a nemzeti szuverenitás és hol az EU szuverenitásnak a határai. Mit gondol erről a kérdésről? Mert ugye Morawiecki kormányfő is ezzel érvel, ezzel próbálja meg a saját igazát bizonyítani önökkel szemben. Eljárásrendi kérdésről van szó, vagy pedig egy olyan politikai konfliktusról, amit ideje volna végre komolyan venni az EU tagállamainak?
Both are true. First of all, I want to explain that if I'm in Budapest now, I will go to Warsaw next week and in between to Luxembourg, it's because we are sure that the dialogue is the best solution if it's possible. So if we have some concern about different situations, of course we try to engage first a dialogue with the entire society, not only with the government, but with the parliament, with the opposition, with civil society, with all the different actors. And so if it's possible to find a way to the correct application of the EU law or a correct respect for the decision of the ECG, why not? But if it's not, we need to use other tools, and it's the reason why I don't want to elaborate more, but we are going to the Court of Justice in different cases. And for the future, of course, the situation is very clear. The primacy of the EU law, that means that we have the same application of the EU law in the entire European Union, because a Hungarian judge, a Polish judge, a German judge are European judges, and they need to apply exactly the same rules, but with the same interpretation. And the decision at the EU level was to give to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg the responsibility to give the correct interpretation of the EU law. And that's what is at stake. Of course, for the future, I've proposed also to organize a dialogue not only with the government, but between the courts. I have proposed to the President of the Constitutional Court in Budapest to come in Brussels with all the President of the Constitutional Court, the President of the Court in Luxembourg, in Strasbourg, to discuss about the relations between the court. But at the end, the only one way for the moment is to pay full respect for the decision of the European Court of Justice. If we want to change that, we need to change maybe the treaties, like, to be very concrete, when there are some questions about a possible EU rule, like I've seen in the last hours about migration and asylum in Hungary. It's possible to try to change the rules. And the Commission has put on the table, a migration pact to change the rule about migration. But if we want to do something, we need to do that together, because it's a shared sovereignty.
Csak ugye pont ez az együttes döntéshozatal látszik sérülni akkor, amikor ugye azt látjuk, hogy például Varga Judit most a Magyar Alkotmánybírósághoz fordult, és látva a Magyar Alkotmánybíróság fideszes többségét, okkal feltételezhető, hogy ők is Varga Judit álláspontját fogják majd favorizálni. Ilyen szempontból a magyar példa megerősítheti majd a lengyel példát, és azok, akik mondjuk az EU integritásáért aggódnak, joggal gondolhatják azt, hogy ezek a példák elősegítették azt, hogy igazából egyfajta kétsebességes Európa irányába induljon a közösség egésze, azért, hogy az integritást valamilyen módon mégiscsak meg lehessen tartani.
It's the reason why we are obliged to react all the time when there is a contestation about or the primacy of the EU law or the binding character of a decision of the ECG. And I have said to the President of the Constitutional Court that it's very important to stick to the primacy of the EU law, to apply the decision of the ECG in all the different situations, and we agree on this. But I said also that if we have some concern about the situation and the possible contestation of an ECG decision, we'll continue to organize the proceedings. And the proceedings is again to go back to the Court of Justice and to ask a decision to the Court of Justice.
De akkor hadd kérdezzem meg élesebben. Ha ezek az eljárásrendi folyamatok nem vezetnek eredményre, akkor van-e más politikai megoldása ennek a konfliktusnak, ami a magyar kormány és a lengyel kormány álláspontja miatt robbant ki a közösség egészén belül, mint a kétsebességes Európa?
But I'm hoping that we will have, at the end of the process, a real decision in the different member states to apply the final decisions of the Court of Justice. Because
ha ez nem történik meg.
We will see, but it's the best possible solution to show that we are going to the end. Just to give an example, in Poland, we have had some concerns about the disciplinary regime of the judges. We have organized infringement proceedings before the court. Now we have received a decision of the Court of Justice about a daily financial sanction against Poland of €1 million a day. to do what? Just to apply a decision of the Court of Justice. So I'm hoping that at the end of the process, when you have a final decision of the court, it will be possible to apply that. And of course, if it's not, there are also possible discussions in the Open Council. There are some possibilities to work in the Open Council about that. And so we will use all the tools at our disposal, because there are two main principles in the functioning of the Union. I said, you need to be sure as a citizen that you will have the same application of the same law in the entire European Union. That means the primacy, like we have said, but also the same interpretation by the European Court of Justice. And so we try to explain that to all the member states. And again, it's a commitment of the member states. It's not an imposition coming from the Commission or from Brussels. It's in the treaties, and it's a real acceptance by the member states to do that. And you know, if you don't accept the content and the provision of the treaty itself is provide the solution. And we don't want to see such a solution. Is the Article 50.
Igen, de hogy
It was decided by the UK, but it's a pity to do that.
De ugye pont ez a két kormány, a lengyel és a magyar kormány, és nem az ő védőügyvédük van, csak interpretálom a nézetüket, ők hivatkoznak arra, hogy az alapszerződések ebben a joghierarchiai kérdésben nem fogalmaznak egyértelműen.
No, but the definition is very clear. It's given by the ECJ. That's the solution in the treaty, is to give to the European Court of Justice the competence to give the correct interpretation. And so if we want to stay in a union, again, we need to have the same approach about the EU law. And of course, I know that there are some hesitations in the member states due to historical process or due to a cultural approach against one part of the EU law. But if you start such a process, you will have a sort of Europe à la carte. Every country will decide that it's possible to apply a part of the EU law, but not the rest. It's no more union. And that's the real issue that we have for the moment. And it's a real challenging discussion, of course.
De ez a nagy kérdés, és megértve a pozíciójából adódó diplomáciai kötöttségeket, az legalábbis kijelenthető, hogyha az összes ilyen eljárásrendet kimerítik majd a következő években, lehet, hogy 5 év, nem tudom mennyi idő. Elképzelhető, hogy eljut egy olyan pontra ez a vita, nem lehet kizárni, hogy egy ponton szükséges lesz különbséget tenni tagállam és tagállam között, tehát a kétsebességes Európai Uniót bevezetni.
No, the goal is not to have two different...
Azt értem, hogy nem ez a cél, de hogy kizárható-e az, hogy ezt meg lehet-e úszni?
I don't want to exclude anything in the world, but again, for the moment, we try to engage a real dialogue with the member states to explain what are the rules and what is needed to do. And if it's impossible with dialogue, we try to go to the Court of Justice. And you have seen that until now, we have received positive reactions. And again, if I'm going back to Hungary, the first decision was maybe about the funding of NGOs. And you have seen after some months, we have received a decision of the court, but also a decision in the Hungarian parliament to come with a new law. And now we are analyzing the new law to see if it's in full compliance with the decision of the ECJ. But the reaction was to apply the decision of the ECJ. The same about, I said, the universities. We will see about the law concerning the minors. If we are able to receive a positive decision of the Court of Justice, we will ask also to apply. And now on migration and asylum, we are knowing that there are some contestation before the Constitutional Court, but we continue the process and we'll continue to act if it's needed before the Court of Justice. And I have said that to the Hungarian government today. So let us go further and forward with our approach to be sure that it's possible to have a way back maybe. The contestation is possible, again. It's possible for a national government to disagree with the Commission. What we are just explaining, that at the end of the process, if we are going to the Court of Justice, you need to have a full respect for the decision of the court. And again, we spoke earlier about the conditionality mechanism. It's very clear. Hungary and Poland has decided to go to the court. I'm quite sure is to give a full respect to the decision of the court. If you are going to the court, you ask a decision and you will apply the decision. So if you want to do that about the conditionality mechanism, why not about the other issues? And so we ask just to do the same.
És akkor ide kapcsolódóan a záró kérdéskör. A magyar kormány minden úgynevezetten Brüsszel ellenes kampánya és mindenféle egyéb propaganda tevékenységnek a dacára a magyar állampolgárok körében az EU elfogadottsága rekordmagas továbbra is, az egyik legmagasabb az egész Európai Unión belül. Mégis azt lehet látni, hogy a 2013-as Tavares jelentés óta folyamatosan visszatérően megfogalmazódnak kritikák a magyarországi jogállamiság, korrupció, médiahelyzet strukturális problémáival kapcsolatban. Ugye 2013-ban volt az első szisztematikus jelentés, ami megjelent, az akkor született magyar állampolgárok mostanra már az első elemeit járják az iskolában, tehát ők idáig eljutottak, viszont a magyar állampolgárok, akik mondjuk elvárnának valamilyen élesebb fellépést az EU részéről, azt látják, hogy diplomáciai üzengetéseken kívül a mostani forrás visszatartáson túlmenően igazából nem történt semmi. Mit üzenne nekik, akik kifejezetten frusztráltak attól, hogy azt látják, a magyar kormány játszikönnyedséggel képes kijátszani önöket, és a saját szabályai szerint értelmezni a közös szabályokat?
That's maybe the life, to see that we are making progress during all the crises. And if you remember, some years ago, it was possible to analyze the budgetary situation in all the member states with congratulations for all the member states, and maybe more for some than for others. And then we have the bank crisis. At that time, I was Minister of Finance in my own country. And after the bank crisis and the sovereign debt crisis in Greece, to be concrete, we have put into place new mechanisms to be more strong about the budgetary situation with the European semester, the country-specific recommendations to all the member states. And you have seen during different years that it was very important for all the participants to take care about the budgetary situation and to take care about structural reforms, pension schemes, other kind of reforms. It's true that it was maybe not with the same attention to the values and to the rule of law during many years. I remember I was member of the council at that time as minister, and I've asked with some colleagues to organize a peer review about the rule of law. Why? Because we have seen that it was not granted. It was not sure that because a country become to be a member state, that it was for centuries that it was without any problem about the rule of law. And so we have said, why not to open the same discussions about the values than about the budgetary situation and the different conversions in the economic field. And it's true that it was maybe late to do that, but we are sure that we have a risk of a crisis in different member states if we don't take care of this. And I'm very proud that now we have new tools to try to react. The rule of law report is the first one, and it's very efficient. We have seen many reforms since the publication last year of the first report in many member states. But of course, you need to have a willingness to do that. And if it's not enough to do that with the report and with dialogue with the member states, now we have we have spoke about that, the new conditionality mechanism. We have new tools like the Next Generation EU plans. And so it must be very important to show that also for the young generation that we are taking care of the values enshrined in the treaties, like we have tried to take care of the budgetary situation of the member states in the past. But again, the reason to do that only now, it's maybe due to the fact that we didn't have such a crisis before. It's maybe in the last years that we have seen some real problems concerning the rule of law in different member states, and we have decided to organize a process. It was long, it's true, it's not easy to put into place such a mechanism, but I'm very proud that since the beginning of this commission, it was possible to, for the first time, to publish a report on the rule of law in the 27 member states, and to engage real discussion with all the different member states on this. Now we have discussion in the Geneva Council in Brussels with all the ministers on the table. We have discussion in the Justice Council, in the European Parliament, and it's the first time. You have seen also at the European Council some weeks ago, it was a huge debate about the independence of the judiciary concerning the situation in Poland. So it's become to be new. Maybe, it's true, it's maybe late, it's due to the crisis. But if I may, you have seen the huge interest and hopefully of the young generation about climate change. It's due to the crisis. It's maybe late to move on this, but it's time. And now we have the COP26 in Glasgow, and we try to give an answer. And maybe it's life. We are acting maybe too too much in relation with a specific crisis, but when we have a real vision of the crisis, we try to take the good decisions. And it was the case about the budget, it's the case about the rule of law, it must be the case about the climate change.
De ugyanakkor önök egy eljárásrendi, deliberatív folyamatban gondolkodnak, míg a magyar és a lengyel kormány esetében azt látjuk, hogy ők egy politikai küzdelmet folytatnak. Egyszerűen nem ugyanaz az eszköztáruk, amiben vitatkoznak kvázi ugyanarról a témáról. És valamilyen módon mégiscsak azt láthatja az EU közössége, hogy ez a két nemzeti kormány a nemzeti szuverenitásra hivatkozva igenis hatásosan tudta kijátszani a közösségi szabályokat, és azok nem voltak alkalmasak arra, hogy bizonyítsák az életképességüket. Ezeknek a kritikusoknak mit válaszolna, mert ők nem csak Magyarországon vannak jelen, hanem jelen vannak a teljes európai közösségben?
The response is very clear. It's a very old story, the situation between the national sovereignty and the shared sovereignty at the EU level. But when you decide to share the sovereignty, for some kind of competence you need to discuss and to take the decision together. It's impossible to go back alone to a national sovereignty when you have decided to take part in a common process at the EU level. But what is possible to do about that? It's very clear. It's to convince more and more participants that we need to pay more attention to the principles and to the rule of law and to the full respect for the principles that I've described, the primacy of the EU law and the binding character of the decision of the ECJ. And it's the case. If you look to the situation now, we have a real support for the European Parliament about that. We have a real support from the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, also for the European Court for Human Rights in Strasbourg. There are more and more discussions in the European Council about that, and in the different formation of the Council, like in the Geneva Council and in the Justice Council. But to do more, we need to do what I try to do now. I try to go to all the member states and to try to install a real culture of the rule of law. And you asked the question about the young generation. I'm hoping that, and I'm sure that is the case, in the young generation, there's a huge interest for the values and for the protection of the values. And so we need to try to attract all the young generation, and if it's possible, all the citizens, in such a mood that is the only one way to protect the individual freedoms, the fundamental rights, to organize a real rule of law process. And to do that, of course, we need to control the situation in all the member states. And so it's not just the role of the Commission to go to the Court of Justice or the role of the Parliament to publish a report. It's also a role of the member states in the Council, and it's the role of the citizens. And so it's the reason why, again, I try to make a tour of all the member states to start such a discussion. It's not with a 2-day visit that will be enough, but we'll try with civil society to organize more and more debates. And thanks to you, I have the opportunity to explain what we try to do. But it's also a responsibility of each and every one citizen to be aware that without a full respect of the rule of law, there is a risk for the individual rights and for the freedoms.
Az a probléma, hogy Magyarországon például, de tudnék mondani más kelet-európai államokat is, egész egyszerűen a jogbiztonságnak az alapvető intézményi garanciái sem léteznek. Tehát amikor a rule of law-ról beszél, akkor egyszerűen nincsen meg annak az intézményi biztosíték a nemzetállami szinten, hogy ennek érvényt lehessen szerezni. Tehát amikor diszfunkcionálisak a nemzeti intézmények, és azt lehet látni, hogy diszfunkcionálisak az európai intézmények is, akkor nagyon nehéz az állampolgárnak hinni azokban az eljárásrendekben, amelyekre ön hivatkozik, hogy azok fognak biztonságot és demokráciát és jogbiztonságot eredményezni. Tehát, hogy egy nagyon egyszerű képetes példával akarok élni, ha most valamelyik stábtagom idejönne, benyúlna a zsebébe és kivenni a pénztárcáját, elmehetne a magyar rendőrséghez, tehetne feljelentést, és heteken, hónapokon keresztül valami valószínűleg történne, de az is lehet, hogy nem. A pénztárcája viszont nem lenne már önnél. Erre milyen válaszsal tud szolgálni az az Európai Unió, amely most már több mint 8 éve viaskodik a magyar kormánnyal, hogy a legelemibb közösségi szabályokat ugyan tartsa már be?
But we are fighting with all the member states to improve the situation. And of course, I said the first report of the rule of law was in September last year, the second one in July this year. So we are engaged, and you know that during the pandemic it was maybe not so easy to organize the communications and the discussion with the civil society and all the citizens on this. But it's very clear that next year will come with a third edition, and we'll put in the new rule of law report some recommendations. So it will be very clear. You will read what are the recommendations of the European Commission about the improvement of the rule of law in the different part of the report. So the efficiency of the justice system, the fight against corruption, media pluralism. And so I will ask to the civil society, and maybe such a guy coming to me, to see year after year if there is a real improvement. That's the only one way to be efficient. Just to give an example, I spoke about the violence against journalists. And you know, to give an example, in Malta, with the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia some years ago, it was needed to organize justice reforms. And there are justice reform. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but we have pushed pressure, and there is a real intention in the government, the parliament, to come with the reforms day after day, because there is a real change in the civil society also in Malta. But it's not enough. They have also organized investigations, and we have put, what is possible to do, with Europol, some capacities on the ground. And you have seen maybe that there are people brought to justice about the murder. I've seen the family, I've seen the members of the family of Daphne Caruana Galizia, and now we have had some results. So it's a question of willingness, but it's not enough to have a real intention at the level of some institutions. I'm sure that in Malta it was possible to do that due to a real change in the society, in the civil society, but in the society in general. And when you ask, is it possible to have an evolution in different parts of Europe, it's the same. If you don't have the capacity to convince the citizens that it's very important for them to protect the rule of law, it will be difficult to make progress. And I know that sometimes it seems to be abstract. When we speak about rule of law, it seems to be far. But again, if you have a problem with the authorities, you need to be sure that it's possible to go to an independent judge. If the judge is linked to the authorities, you don't have any chance. And so, in the entire Europe, it was we try to explain the obligation in the treaty to have an independent justice system is to protect the individual rights of the citizens, like the rights of the businesses. In the Charter of Fundamental Rights is one of the most important rights of the citizens, to be able, if you have any problem, to go to an independent judge. And that's what we try to organize in the entire Europe, with many improvements year after year, and if it's needed, with some proceedings before the Court of Justice.
Biztos úr, nagyon szépen köszönöm, hogy elfáradt a stúdiónkba, és köszönöm, hogy válaszolt a kérdéseinkre.
Pleasure.
Ez volt az interjúm Didier Reynderssel, aki az Európai Bizottság igazságügyi biztosa, és aki egy villámlátogatásra érkezett Magyarországra, hogy tájékozódjon a magyarországi állapotokról. Mindenképp iratkozzatok fel a csatornára, hogyha még nem tettétek volna meg, ha van bármilyen kérdésetek vagy észrevételetek az elhangzottakkal kapcsolatban, akkor pedig a komment szekcióban tudtok nekünk visszajelzést küldeni. Mindenképpen fizessetek elő a Partizánra, ha még esetleg nem tettétek volna ezt megtehetitek a Patreon felületünkön keresztül, ehhez a linket megtaláljátok a leírásban. Munkatársaim nevében köszönöm szépen a megtisztelő figyelmeteket, hamarosan találkozunk, addig is, ciao.